Stefano Puskás. Puskás arrived in Madrid at 31, overweight, coming off a FIFA ban. The Spanish press called him finished. Stefano took one look at him in training and wasn't sure they were wrong. This wasn't just about a winning streak. It was about a specific vision and two guys who looked like they had nothing in common, Alfredo Di Stefano and Ferenc Puskas. But to get why they were so dominant, you have to look at the guy writing the checks, Santiago Bernabéu. In a recovering post-war Europe, Bernabéu possessed a singular, ambitious foresight. He constructed a colossal stadium, the Nuevo Chamartín, operating on the economic theory that a massive capacity would generate the revenue necessary to acquire the world's finest talent. His target was Alfredo Di Stefano, a player whose acquisition would fundamentally alter the trajectory of the sport. The arrival of Di Stefano in 1953 marked the beginning of this new era. The Argentine was more than a striker. He was a total footballer decades before the term was coined. He would collect the ball from his own goalkeeper, orchestrate play through the midfield, and finish moves in the opposition's box. He was the on-field general, arrogant, demanding, and technically peerless. His individual brilliance was recognised globally, earning him the Ballon d'Or in both 1957 and 1959. Under his command, Real Madrid secured the inaugural European Cup in 1956, followed swiftly by titles in 1957 and 1958. The dynasty was already established, but it achieved immortality with the arrival of Ferenc Puskas in 1958. The context of his signing was fraught with geopolitical tension. Following the Hungarian Revolution, Puskás had refused to return to Budapest, resulting in a FIFA ban. By the time he arrived in Madrid, he was 31 years old and visibly overweight. The Spanish press was sceptical, labelling him a spent force, and even Di Stefano initially harboured doubts regarding the Hungarian's physical condition. However, Puskás possessed a technical ability that defied his physique. He adapted his game, realising he did not need to match Di Stefano's frenetic work rate. He simply needed to occupy the correct spaces. Di Stefano covered every blade of grass. Puskás just stood in the space Di Stefano left behind and waited. It worked immediately. Di Stefano served as the engine, the organiser who covered every blade of grass, while Puskás operated as the clinical assassin, lurking in the pockets of space Di Stefano created. Together, they spearheaded a period of unprecedented success. The most significant metric of this era remains the 5 consecutive European Cups, 1956 to 1960. No club before or since has managed to monopolise the continent's premier competition so thoroughly from its inception. While their European exploits garnered the headlines, their domestic dominance was equally suffocating. The foundation laid by this team and the longevity of players like Paco Gento ensured that the club would secure 12 La Liga titles during the extended era of these icons, creating a dynasty of silverware that overwhelmed Spanish football. This era hit its absolute peak on May 18th, 1960, at Hampden Park in Glasgow. The European Cup final saw Real Madrid face Eintracht Frankfurt before a crowd of 127,000. It is a match widely regarded by historians as the greatest exhibition of attacking football ever played. Though Frankfurt opened the scoring, the response from Madrid was overwhelming. Di Stefano equalised quickly, then added a second to take the lead. Then Puskás took over. He scored just before halftime, added a penalty after the break, and then netted 2 more to complete a 4-goal haul. Di Stefano completed his hat-trick shortly after. The final score was 7-3. By the time the final whistle blew, the Scottish crowd, 127,000 people who had no dog in the fight, were on their feet for Real Madrid. Real Madrid had secured their 5th consecutive European Cup. That night in Glasgow solidified the legacy of the White Ballet. They set a standard of glamour and dominance that defined the club's identity for decades to come. Pelé's golden age, 1958 to 1970. If you look back at the footage from 1958, it almost feels like a different universe. The broadcasts were grainy and black and white. The balls were heavy leather spheres that soaked up water like sponges, and the boots offered about as much protection as a pair of canvas sneakers. Into this rugged, physical world stepped a 17-year-old kid who looked like he shouldn't even be there. He was skinny, he was nursing a knee injury, and he was weeping on the shoulder of his goalkeeper after the final whistle. Before 1958, Brazil was known for talent, but also for heartbreak, specifically the Maracanã of 1950, where they lost the World Cup at home. 8 years earlier, Brazil had lost the World Cup at home. The whole country watched. Pelé was 9 years old, sitting with his father, who wept. In 1958, he paid the debt when Pelé flicked the ball over a defender's head, the chapeau, and volleyed it home. He scored the goal, sure, but in that moment, he also invented the modern idea of the superstar. But to define this era solely by World Cups is to miss the magic of the day-to-day grind. Between the global tournaments, Pelé was turning Santos FC into the Harlem Globetrotters of football. In the 1960s, European clubs were desperate to sign him. Real Madrid, Juventus, Manchester United, they all threw checkbooks at Santos. But Brazil declared him a national treasure, effectively forbidding his export. So, instead of Pelé going to Europe, Europe had to wait for Santos to come to them on tour. And they did. They travelled the world, playing exhibition matches where audiences packed stadiums just to see O Rei, the king. This was the era where the legend grew, sometimes outpacing reality. There's the story of the Nigerian Civil War, pausing for 48 hours just so combatants could watch Pelé play a friendly in Lagos. True or not, the fact that people believed it tells you everything. He was scoring for fun, passing the 1,000 goal mark in 1969, amidst a media frenzy that bordered on hysteria. However, the golden age wasn't without its rust. The 1962 World Cup in Chile was bittersweet. Pelé scored a wonder goal against Mexico, but tore a muscle shortly after. The world watched as Garrincha, the little bird, took over the mantle. It proved Brazil wasn't a one-man show, but it also left fans hungry for the king's return. Then came the darkness of 1966 in England. This was the low point of the era. Defenders had realised they couldn't stop Pelé with skill, so they decided to stop him with violence. He was hacked down mercilessly by the Bulgarian and Portuguese defences. He limped off the pitch, battered and bruised, vowing never to play in a World Cup again. The joy was gone. The Jogo Bonito seemed dead, replaced by European cynicism and tactical fouling. But the story couldn't end there. It needed a third act. By 1970, the world had changed. Television was broadcasting in colour, and Pelé, now 29, was convinced to return for one last dance in the heat of Mexico. This wasn't the speedy teenager of 58. This was a veteran, smarter, stronger, and surrounded by perhaps the greatest collection of talent ever assembled. Jairzinho, Tostão, Rivellino, and Carlos Alberto. This tournament was the masterpiece. In Technicolor yellow, Brazil put on a performance. Pelé was the conductor. We remember the goals. Sure, the leap over the Italian defender in the final was superhuman, but strangely, we remember the misses just as much. The shot from the halfway line against Czechoslovakia that drifted inches wide. The header saved by Gordon Banks. The dummy against the Uruguayan keeper, where he let the ball run without touching it. These moments defined the era because they showed imagination that no one else possessed. He was trying things that hadn't been invented yet. The climax came in the dying minutes of the 1970 final against Italy. Pelé received the ball at the edge of the box. He didn't shoot, he didn't dribble. He paused, rolling the ball casually into empty space to his right. It looked like a mistake to the naked eye, until Carlos Alberto came sprinting out of nowhere to smash it into the net. From the crying teenager in Sweden to the king being carried off the field in Mexico, wearing a sombrero, stripped to his undershirt by adoring fans, the journey was complete. He had secured 3 World Cups and 2 Copa Libertadores titles, but his real legacy was globalizing the game. When he retired, New York paid him $3 million just to show up and play. When he retired from the national team, the golden age ended. The game became faster, more systemic, and more athletic in the decades to follow, but it arguably never looked as happy as it did when the king was on the throne. Cruyff versus Beckenbauer, 1970, was the year the crown of world football moved across the Atlantic. For over a decade, Pelé and Brazil had owned the sport's imagination, but after the final whistle in Mexico City, the king stepped down. He left a void at the top that sparked a decade-long war of ideas between two of the greatest minds to ever touch a ball. This wasn't a rivalry defined by goals alone, it was a battle over the very geometry of the pitch. On one side stood Johan Cruyff, the slender chain-smoking rebel from Amsterdam. On the other was Franz Beckenbauer, the regal commanding Kaiser of Munich. Cruyff was the face of total football at Ajax. Under manager Rinus Michels, he helped unleash a system that made the rigid formations of the past look like museum pieces. In this world, space was everything. If a defender moved forward, a midfielder dropped back to cover. A winger might suddenly appear as a centre-back. It was fluid, dizzying, and beautiful to watch. Cruyff wasn't playing a game. He was conducting an orchestra. He would point, shout, and organise his teammates in real time, moving them around like chess pieces, while he searched for the one angle no one else saw. Ajax rode this philosophy to 3 consecutive European Cups from 1971 to 1973, making them the coolest, most feared club on the planet. But while the Dutch were busy inventing the future of attack, Franz Beckenbauer was busy reinventing the art of defence. At Bayern Munich, Beckenbauer perfected the role of the libero, or attacking sweeper. In the 1960s, a sweeper was just a safety net, someone who sat behind the defence to clear the trash. The Kaiser turned it into a weapon. He would collect the ball at the edge of his own box and glide forward, head up, chest out, bypass the midfield, and launch an attack before the opposition even realised he'd left his post. He looked like he was playing in a tuxedo, while everyone else was in a mud fight. He matched Cruyff's dominance step for step, leading Bayern to their own three-peat of European Cups between 1974 and 1976. The ultimate collision between these two philosophies happened on July 7th, 1974, the World Cup final in Munich. It was the total football of the Netherlands against the iron-willed pragmatism of West Germany. The Dutch were so arrogant that they scored a penalty in the first minute before a German player had even touched the ball. They spent the next 20 minutes mocking the Germans, passing the ball in circles, trying to humiliate them. That was their mistake. Beckenbauer didn't panic. He organised the defence, tasked Bertie Vogts with hounding Cruyff into submission, and slowly sucked the life out of the Dutch flair. The Germans clawed back, won 2-1, and Beckenbauer lifted the trophy on home soil. Cruyff won 3 Ballon d'Or. Beckenbauer won 2. Cruyff changed how we think about the ball. Beckenbauer changed how we think about the field. By the time 1978 rolled around, they had shared 5 individual awards and 6 European Cups between them. It was a decade of high-stakes, intellectual warfare that dragged football into the modern age, proving that the game was won in the mind long before it was won on the grass. The Maradona era. If the story of 1980s football had a heartbeat, it thumped in the chest of Diego Armando Maradona. While other eras were defined by great teams, this specific window of time was held hostage by one man. It began in July 1984, not with a match, but with an earthquake of human emotion. Diego arrived in Naples, a gritty, impoverished city in the south of Italy that the wealthy northern clubs looked down upon. 75,000 people packed the San Paolo Stadium just to see him juggle a ball. They didn't know it yet, but they were welcoming a saviour who would turn the hierarchy of Italian football upside down. Before the glory, there was the struggle. Serie A was a war zone in the mid-80s, the undisputed centre of the football universe. Defences were brutal, and tackles were designed to end careers. Maradona took the beating. He was kicked, pulled, and battered by the likes of Juventus and AC Milan, but his low centre of gravity and that magical left foot kept him upright. For 2 years, he built the foundation, dragging a mediocre Napoli squad toward respectability. But the explosion happened in the summer of 1986 in Mexico. That was the month Diego Maradona went from player to myth. The 1986 World Cup was his canvas. Argentina wasn't the favourite teams, like France and Brazil had more talent on paper. But Diego was on a mission that felt almost spiritual. Argentina was a good team, but Diego made them look like they were possessed. He wasn't just wearing the armband, he was dragging 10 other men toward a trophy they had no business winning. In the quarterfinals against England, the duality of the man was laid bare in 4 minutes that will be replayed forever. He punched it in with his fist, looked the referee in the eye, said nothing. It was cheating, yes, but to Diego, it was defiance. Then, minutes later, came the penance. He picked up the ball in his own half and embarked on the goal of the century. He ghosted past Reed, danced around Butcher, left Fenwick on the floor, and slotted it past Shilton. It was impossible brilliance. He had beaten an entire national team by himself. He carried that momentum all the way to the final against West Germany. Even when the Germans locked him down with Lothar Matthäus, Diego found the one moment of space to play the pass that won the World Cup. He lifted the trophy in Azteca, the undisputed king of the world. But the real miracle was waiting back in Italy. Returning to Naples as a world champion, Maradona did the unthinkable. In the 1986-87 season, he led Napoli to their first ever Scudetto. You have to understand the context. A team from the south had never won the league. It was always the giants of the north, Turin and Milan. Diego changed that. The celebrations in Naples lasted for weeks. There were mock funerals held for Juventus in the streets. Murals of his face appeared on building walls next to saints. To the city, he was no longer a striker. He was a patron saint. The dominance continued. He added a UEFA Cup in 1989, dancing through the German defences of Stuttgart. By 1990, he delivered a second league title to Naples. At this point, AC Milan had Gullit, Van Basten and Rijkaard, arguably the greatest club side ever assembled. And yet, Diego kept beating them. He was playing against super teams with a collection of good but not great teammates. It was a testament to his sheer will. He elevated everyone around him. If you wore a Napoli shirt, you believed you could beat anyone because you had number 10. However, the end of the era was as dramatic as the rise. The 1990 World Cup was held in Italy, and fate drew Argentina against Italy in the semi-final played, of all places, in Naples. Diego asked the Neapolitans to support him over their own country. The division tore the stadium apart. Argentina won on penalties, but the Italian establishment turned on him. In the final against West Germany, the magic ran out. A controversial penalty settled it, and Diego wept openly as the Germans celebrated. He felt the walls closing in. The fall came quickly after that. Suspensions, scandals, and a departure from Italy in the dead of night marked the end of the golden years. Zidane and Ronaldo, 1998 to 2003. If the story of football at the turn of the millennium was a movie, it would be a buddy cop film where the two leads never actually played together until the final act. Between 1998 and 2003, the sport wasn't ruled by a single king, but by a duality. On one side, you had the raw, terrifying force of nature. On the other, the silent, brooding conductor. Zidane and Ronaldo Nazario shared the stage, trading the spotlight in a way that felt scripted by the gods of football. They were the bridge between the nostalgic past and the hyper-commercial future, the faces of a game that was rapidly becoming a global obsession. To understand this era, you have to start with the phenomenon, oh phenomeno. Before the knee injuries, Ronaldo was something the world had simply never seen before. He was built like a heavyweight boxer, but moved with the speed of a sprinter. At Barcelona, and then Inter Milan, he didn't just beat defenders, he humiliated them. He turned the greatest league in the world, Serie A, into his personal playground. Defenders like Maldini and Cannavaro, the best ever, looked terrified when he ran at them. He was a singular force, a man who seemed destined to own the decade. Then came the summer of 1998. The World Cup in France was supposed to be his coronation. Brazil was the favourite, and Ronaldo was the golden boy. But on the day of the final in Paris, the script flipped. A mysterious seizure in the team hotel left Ronaldo a ghost of himself on the pitch. Into that vacuum stepped Zinedine Zidane. Until that moment, Zidane was respected as a brilliant midfielder for Juventus, but he wasn't a deity. That night changed everything. 2 corners, 2 headers, 2 goals. Zidane won the World Cup, sure, but he also united a fractured nation. His face was projected onto the Arc de Triomphe. He became Zizou, the national hero, while Ronaldo watched from the sidelines, his shoes hanging around his neck, a tragic figure in defeat. The rivalry, if you can call it that, because they were friends, intensified, while Zidane ascended to a plane of elegance, winning Euro 2000 with a brand of football that looked like ballet. Ronaldo descended into hell. The knee injury against Lazio is a sound that still haunts anyone who heard it. The snap, the scream. For almost 3 years, the phenomenon was gone. The world moved on. Zidane was now the undisputed king, transferring to Real Madrid for a world record fee and scoring the greatest goal in Champions League history, that impossible volley against Leverkusen in Glasgow. He was the artist at the peak of his powers, painting masterpieces with his feet. But football loves a resurrection. In 2002, the World Cup moved to Asia. And so did the narrative. Ronaldo returned. He was heavier, breathless, and sporting a bizarre triangle haircut, designed so his son could recognise him on TV. Nobody expected the old magic. The explosive speed was dampened, but the instinct was sharper than ever. In the final against Germany, he faced Oliver Kahn, the Titan, in goal. It was the irresistible force against the immovable object. Ronaldo blinked first, then struck twice. 2 goals to banish the ghosts of 1998. He wept on the bench before the whistle even blew. He had climbed out of the abyss to reclaim his crown. Finally, the galaxy aligned. Florentino Perez brought the 2 gods together at Real Madrid, the Galacticos. Watching them play in the same white shirt felt like cheating. They were polar opposites that fit perfectly. Zidane was the calm in the storm, the man who could stop time with a touch, pirouette away from trouble, and slide a pass through the eye of a needle. Ronaldo was the chaos, the finisher who would latch onto those passes and destroy the net. Winning wasn't enough, they had to entertain. They brought a sense of joy and yoga bonito to the Bernabeu. For 5 years, they passed the Ballon d'Or and the FIFA World Player of the Year award back and forth like a family heirloom. 3 for Zidane, 3 for Ronaldo. They were the last of the human superstars before the robotic efficiency of the Messi and Cristiano era took over. They had flaws, they had tempers, they had injuries, but when they were on the pitch, the world stopped to watch. It was the era of the artist and the phenomenon, a brief, beautiful window where football felt less like a system and more like magic. The Ronaldinho era, 2004 to 2006. The Bernabeu stood up for him, not politely, genuinely, for a Brazilian in a Barcelona shirt. That was 2005. That was Ronaldinho. European football in the early 2000s had gone cold. Tactical, physical, rigid. The Galacticos had tried to buy magic and found out that star names don't automatically produce beautiful football. Then, in 2003, a grinning Brazilian arrived in Catalonia and reminded everyone what the game was actually for. When Ronaldinho landed at Barcelona, the club was in a dark depression. No major trophy in years, living in the shadow of a Madrid team stacked with Zidane, Figo, and Ronaldo Nazario. But while Madrid had the names, Barcelona suddenly had the magic. Ronaldinho didn't treat the Camp Nou like a pitch. He treated it like a dance floor. By 2004 to 2005, the era truly began. With Ricard managing and Eto'o providing the finishing, Ronaldinho was given the keys and told to drive. He played with a freedom that bordered on anarchy. No-look passes, elasticos, shots with no backswing that left goalkeepers rooted. He reclaimed La Liga for Barcelona for the first time in 6 years, and along the way scored a goal against Chelsea at Stamford Bridge, a standing toe poke with no backlift that had no logical explanation. He won FIFA World Player of the Year. Nobody argued. The peak came in 2005 to 2006. In November 2005, during El Clasico, he tore through the Real Madrid defence twice from the halfway line and slotted past Casillas both times. The Santiago Bernabeu, 80,000 people who were supposed to hate him rose to their feet. It had not happened since Maradona. It may not happen again. He swept the Ballon d'Or. Then he conquered Europe. In the Champions League final in Paris against Arsenal, heavily marked all night, his presence alone warped the game's gravity. Barcelona came from behind to win 2-1. Ronaldinho lifted the trophy with that smile that never seemed to leave his face. Then the World Cup came. Brazil fell to France, knocked out by a resurgent Zidane. Ronaldinho returned to Barcelona a different person. The intensity dropped. The late nights got later. The acceleration that had made him untouchable began to dull. By 2007, it was over. A teenager from Rosario had been watching everything from the bench, absorbing it all. Ronaldinho had even taken him under his wing, mentored him, passed something on. He just didn't know he was passing on the throne. Tiki-taka Spain. For decades, the Spanish national team carried a heavy, unwanted label, the perennial underachievers. They were the kings of the qualifiers, a collection of brilliant individuals who consistently crumbled when the pressure of a major tournament arrived. By the mid-2000s, international football was defined by pragmatism and physical dominance. The 2006 World Cup had been a gritty, defensive affair, won by a steely Italian side, and the club game was increasingly ruled by the muscular efficiency of the English Premier League. Then, in 2008, the script was rewritten entirely. Luis Aragonés, a wise and stubborn tactician, made a gamble that would change the sport forever. He looked at his squad and realised they couldn't outmuscle Germany or outrun France. Instead, he handed the keys to a group of diminutive technicians, Xavi Hernández, Andrés Iniesta, David Silva, and Cesc Fabregas. He decided that Spain would defend not by tackling, but by keeping the ball so far away from the opponent that they would simply give up chasing it. The Euro 2008 tournament was the proof of concept. While other teams relied on counterattacks and set pieces, Spain played a hypnotic game of rondo on a continental stage. Xavi controlled the tempo with metronomic precision, completing passes in spaces that didn't seem to exist. They swept through the group stages and outclassed a powerful German side in the final. Fernando Torres scored the winner, but the victory belonged to the midfield. The curse of the underachiever was broken, and a new blueprint was established. But the revolution was just getting started. In 2009, Pep Guardiola took over at Barcelona and turbocharged the philosophy. He implemented a system of high pressing and positional play that turned the Spanish style into a suffocating weapon. Barcelona won an unprecedented 6 trophies in a calendar year, the sextuple, playing football that felt almost unfair. This club dominance fed directly into the national team, now led by the calm and unifying Vicente Del Bosque. The 2010 World Cup in South Africa was the ultimate test. The pressure on Spain was suffocating. Every team now knew how they played, and every team set up to destroy it. They faced parked buses, violent tackling, and extreme defensive blocks. Spain didn't blow teams away with high scores. They strangled them with control. They won all 4 of their knockout games by a score of 1-0. It was dominance through deprivation, starving the opponent of the ball until they made a mistake. The final against the Netherlands was a clash of civilizations, Spanish artistry against Dutch aggression. The Dutch tried to kick Spain out of their rhythm, turning the match into a physical brawl. But Spain's discipline held. In the 116th minute, the breakthrough finally came. Iniesta, the quiet genius, latched onto a pass and fired it into the corner. Spain were world champions. The fury of the past had been replaced by the tiki-taka of the present. They held the 2 biggest trophies in the world simultaneously. By 2012, the era reached its zenith. Critics had started to whisper that Spain was becoming boring, that their endless passing without a recognised striker was too sterile. Del Bosque doubled down. In Euro 2012, he often fielded a formation with no true forward, using Cesc Fabregas as a false 9. It was the purest form of midfield dominance the game had ever seen. The final against Italy in Kyiv was their masterpiece. Italy had been the surprise package of the tournament, playing with heart and grit, but that night they ran into a buzzsaw of technical perfection. Spain didn't settle for a win. They dismantled a major European power. David Silva, Jordi Alba, Fernando Torres, and Juan Mata all scored in a 4-0 rout. It was the biggest margin of victory in a European Championship final history. The passing triangles were sharper than ever. The movement was fluid, and the Italians spent 90 minutes chasing shadows. Across this 4-year stretch, Spain achieved the impossible, the international treble of Euro World Cup Euro. Xavi and Iniesta became the symbols of a generation that valued intelligence over physique. They proved that you didn't need to be the tallest or the fastest to dominate. You just needed to be smarter and faster with the ball. However, like all great dynasties, time eventually caught up. The heavy legs of the Barcelona core and the tactical evolution of opponents, specifically the high-intensity pressing developed in Germany, began to crack the code. By the 2014 World Cup, the carousel had slowed down, and the era came to a crashing halt in the group stages. But the legacy of those 4 years remains untouched. Tiki-taka filled the trophy cabinet, but it also changed how football was taught. From academies in England to youth leagues in Japan, everyone wanted to play like Spain. They showed the world that football could be won with devastating, beautiful, technical precision. The trophies were the result, but the style was the legend. For 4 years, the ball belonged to Spain, and the rest of the world was just watching. Messi versus Cristiano. In 2007, Kaká stood on a podium in Zurich, holding the Ballon d'Or. Flanking him were a shy, long-haired Argentine and a flashy, step-over-obsessed Portuguese winger. Kaká was the last mortal to touch gold for a decade. The very next year, the vacuum of the post-Galactico world was filled not by a team, but by a rivalry that would consume the universe. The era didn't begin with a handshake. It began with a collision. In 2008, Cristiano Ronaldo, then a force of nature at Manchester United, powered his side to Champions League glory in Moscow. He won his first Ballon d'Or, combining the athleticism of a sprinter with the leap of a basketball player. But in Catalonia, a quiet storm was brewing. Lionel Messi, inheriting Ronaldinho's number 10 shirt, led Barcelona to a historic treble in 2009. When they met in the Champions League final in Rome, Messi's hanging header sealed the victory. The battle lines were drawn. By 2009, with Ronaldo's record-breaking transfer to Real Madrid, the rivalry went from distant admiration to trench warfare. They were now direct enemies in Spain, the faces of El Clásico, the biggest sporting fixture on earth. For the next 9 years, they pushed each other to levels of production that defied logic. A 30-goal season, once the benchmark for a world-class striker, became a slump. They normalised the extraordinary, regularly scoring 40, 50, even 60 goals a campaign. The early 2000s were defined by their contrasting styles, sparking a global philosophical debate. Messi was the artist, a silent genius, who dribbled through defences with the ball glued to his left foot, orchestrating play like a conductor. Ronaldo was the machine, a physical specimen of perfect efficiency, turning his body into a weapon of mass destruction, capable of scoring from anywhere with either foot or his head. While the world argued over aesthetics, they traded Ballon d'Ors like bored gods playing catch. Messi won 4 in a row from 2009 to 2012, his dominance coinciding with Pep Guardiola's tactical revolution. But just when it seemed Messi had pulled away, Ronaldo reinvented himself. As his pace slowed, his intelligence sharpened. He transformed from a tricky winger into the greatest penalty box predator in history had ever seen. From 2013 to 2018, the momentum swung to Madrid. Ronaldo led Los Blancos to 4 Champions League titles in 5 years, including an unprecedented three-peat. He became the King of Europe, delivering iconic moments like the bicycle kick in Turin and hat-tricks against Atletico Madrid when all hope seemed lost. Messi responded with his own magic, forming the lethal MSN trio and producing moments of sheer brilliance, like the last-minute winner at the Bernabeu, where he held his shirt aloft to a silenced crowd. Of course, there were interruptions. The defensive discipline of Inter Milan in 2010, the miracle of Chelsea in 2012, and the collective machine of Bayern Munich occasionally broke their stranglehold on the European Cup. But even when their teams lost, they remained individually untouchable. Luka Modric's Ballon d'Or win in 2018 was the only brief pause in their duopoly, a momentary glitch in a decade-long program. As the 2020s approached, the era entered its twilight, but the narrative shifted again. Ronaldo left Madrid for Juventus, continuing to score with defiance against the dying light of his career. Messi, forced out of a collapsing Barcelona, found himself in Paris. The goals slowed down, but the roles evolved further. Messi dropped deeper, becoming the ultimate playmaker. Ronaldo stayed high, conserving energy for the single, decisive touch. Then came 2022, the final cinematic climax. For 15 years, the one argument used against Messi was his lack of international glory compared to Ronaldo's Euro 2016 triumph. The World Cup in Qatar felt like the season finale of a show the world had been watching for half a generation. Messi, now an elder statesman, dragged Argentina through the tournament with a mix of veteran savvy and flashes of his youthful genius. The final against France was the perfect chaotic ending to the era, crowning Messi and seemingly settling the debate for millions. By the time the dust settled, the numbers were simply laughing at history. Over 1,600 combined goals, 12 Ballon d'Ors shared between them, 9 Champions League titles. They rendered records meaningless for anyone who follows. The Messi-Ronaldo era was unique for the quality of play, and even more so for the longevity of the hate, the love, and the obsession. They polarized the planet, creating tribes of devotees who celebrated the other's failure as much as their own idol's success. As the next generation Mbappe, Haaland, Vinicius begins to inherit the earth, they do so in the crater left by these two giants. We may see great players again, but we will likely never again see two all-time greats, peaking simultaneously in the same league, pushing each other to perfection every single week for 15 years. The new guard, Mbappe and Haaland. The sun finally began to set on the gods in the desert of Qatar. The 2022 World Cup final was billed as Messi's coronation, and while the Argentine legend eventually lifted the trophy, the night offered a terrifying glimpse of the future. Across the pitch, Kylian Mbappe waged a one-man war against destiny. He scored a hat-trick in the biggest game on earth, dragging France back from the dead twice with a blend of violent speed and icy composure. As he walked past the trophy, he didn't win. The message was clear. The old kings might have one last moment, but the future belonged to him. However, the void left by Messi and Ronaldo wasn't going to be filled by just one man. While Mbappe was conquering the international stage, a blonde giant was landing in Manchester, ready to tear the Premier League's record books to shreds. Critics asked if Haaland could adapt to English football. Instead, he broke it. Questions about whether he could fit into Pep Guardiola's complex system were answered within weeks. He was a force of nature, a throwback to the pure number 9s of old, but upgraded with modern hydraulics. He didn't touch the ball often, sometimes fewer than 10 times a match, but when he did, it was usually to brutalise a defender or rip the net off the frame. Haaland's debut campaign was a procession of dominance. He smashed the Premier League single-season scoring record that had stood for nearly 3 decades, netting 36 goals with terrifying ease. He didn't care for build-up play or rondo passing drills. He cared only for the final, decisive action. His partnership with Kevin De Bruyne became the most lethal supply line in Europe, culminating in Manchester City finally capturing their holy grail, the Champions League. With a continental treble in his pocket at 22 years old, Haaland had achieved in one season what many legends chase for a lifetime. Meanwhile, Mbappe was navigating a different path. If Haaland was the hammer, Mbappe was the blade. Staying in Paris, he became the club's all-time leading scorer, operating with a level of celebrity and pressure that transcended sport. He was a footballer, a cultural icon, and a CEO player who held the keys to the French capital. On the pitch, his game evolved. He retained the explosive pace that made him a teenage phenomenon, but he added a playmaker's vision. He could destroy you with a run in behind, or he could drop deep, spin, and thread a pass through the eye of a needle. The dynamic between the two couldn't be more different from the rivalry that preceded them. Messi and Ronaldo were a battle of aesthetics, the artist versus the athlete. Mbappe and Haaland are a battle of physics. Mbappe is already past you before you decide to tackle him. Haaland doesn't need to be past you, he just needs to be near the ball. By 2024, the landscape shifted seismically again. Mbappe finally made the long-awaited pilgrimage to the Santiago Bernabeu, joining Real Madrid to lead a new generation of Galacticos. It was the move that signalled the true start of the new European duopoly, Haaland's Manchester City, the disciplined systemic machine, versus Mbappe's Real Madrid, the star-studded collection of individual brilliance. The stats they are putting up are already normalising the absurd. Hat-tricks are no longer rare achievements. For these two, they are routine deliverables. They have turned the Champions League into their personal playground, hunting down the goal records set by their predecessors with a hunger that borders on mechanical. Yet this era feels different. It is faster, sharper, and more ruthless. The days of the false nine and patient tiki-taka are fading, replaced by direct, vertical devastation. Defenders today aren't just outskilled, they are physically overwhelmed. When Mbappe isolates a fullback, it's over before he even touches the ball. When Haaland attacks across, he occupies a vertical airspace that no centre-back can reach. As we move deeper into the 2020s, the new guard has firmly seized control. The nostalgia for the Messi-Ronaldo years is fading, replaced by the thrill of this new binary star system. Other talents like Vinicius Jr. and Jude Bellingham orbit them, but the gravitational pull of the sport now centres on the Frenchman and the Norwegian. They are the avatars of modern football, faster, stronger, and more efficient than anything we have seen before. The Catenaccio lockdown, 1960 to 1968. While the rest of the world was obsessed with the samba rhythm of Brazil or the cavalier attacking spirit of Real Madrid, something colder and more calculated was brewing in Milan. The 1960s didn't just bring a new champion, they brought a new philosophy. It was an era defined not by how many goals you could score, but by how many you could stop. Welcome to the age of Catenaccio Italian for Doorbolt, and the architect of this beautiful nightmare was Helenio Herrera. He arrived at Inter Milan not just as a coach, but as a mystic. They called him Il Mago, the wizard, and his methods were equal parts military discipline and cult-like devotion. In a time when training was often casual, Herrera was hanging signs in the locker room that read, "Class plus preparation plus intelligence plus athletics equals Scudetto." He controlled everything, from the players' diets to their sleep schedules. But his greatest innovation was on the pitch. Tactically, football had always been a game of matching up your defender marks my attacker. Herrera looked at that and saw a flaw. If your defender slips, the attacker is through on goal. Where was the insurance policy? So he introduced the libero, or sweeper. This was the free man. He roamed behind the defensive line, marking no one and everyone at the same time. If a striker broke through the first wall of defence, the sweeper was there to clean up the mess. It turned Inter's defence into a fortress that felt impossible to breach. The execution was brutal for opponents. Teams would arrive at the San Siro expecting a football match and find themselves in a claustrophobic trap. Inter would score one goal, often through a quick, surgical counter-attack led by the brilliant Sandro Mazzola, or the pinpoint passing of Luis Suarez, and then the door would bolt shut. They would retreat, suffocate space, and frustrate the life out of the other team. Critics hated it. The British press called it anti-football. They said it was cynical, negative, and destroying the spirit of the game. Inter had no interest in being liked. They only cared about winning, and win they did. The peak of this Grande Inter era came in consecutive European Cup finals. In 1964, they faced Real Madrid, the team that had defined attacking royalty in the 50s. The contrast couldn't have been starker. Stefano and Puskás against the Inter wall. The wall won, 3-1. The next year, 1965, they did it again against Benfica. This time, playing at home in a rain-soaked San Siro, they won 1-0. It was the quintessential Catenaccio scoreline. One moment of brilliance, followed by 89 minutes of disciplined suffering. But the system wasn't just about sitting back. It actually evolved the game in ways people forget. Because the sweeper provided cover, the fullbacks were suddenly free to run forward. Giacinto Facchetti, Inter's left-back, became a sensation, a defender who scored goals. He was the prototype for every modern wing-back we see today. The lockdown mentality eventually bled from the club level into the national identity. The Italian national team, the Azzurri, adopted the philosophy wholesale. It culminated in Euro 1968, a tournament that perfectly encapsulated the era's mix of tactical rigidity and sheer dumb luck. Italy didn't blow teams away in that tournament. In fact, their semi-final against the Soviet Union ended 0-0 after extra time. In a world before penalty shootouts, the finalist was decided by a coin toss in the dressing room. Italy's captain, playing under the defensive creed that you make your own luck, called tails. Italy went through. The final against Yugoslavia was another grind. Italy was losing until the 81st minute when they scraped an equaliser. The match ended 1-1. The replay, held 2 days later, saw the Italians finally unleash their pent-up energy, winning 2-0 to claim the European Championship. By the late 60s, the stranglehold began to loosen. The Celtic Lisbon Lions famously broke the Catenaccio code in the 1967 European Cup final by simply attacking with so much relentless energy that the Italian defence couldn't cope. Herrera's strict methods eventually wore his players down, and the dynasty crumbled under its own intensity. However, the legacy of the Catenaccio lockdown is permanent. Before this era, defence was seen as a necessity, the unglamorous part of the game. Herrera and the Italians turned it into an art form. They taught the world that you don't need the ball to control the game. You just need to control the space. The English era, 1976 to 1984. By the mid-1970s, European football had become a battle of philosophers. The Dutch had total football, a positional fluidity. The West Germans countered with clinical, systematic efficiency. But while the continent was busy theorising about space and movement, the English First Division was busy building a wrecking ball. From 1977 to 1984, the European Cup ceased to be a continental competition. It turned into a procession for English clubs, with teams from working-class cities regularly dismantling Europe's elite. 7 trophies in 8 years. They dominated the era through sheer physical intensity and mental toughness. It started with Liverpool. Manager Bob Paisley didn't look like a revolutionary. He looked like a bloke you'd see nursing a pint at the local pub. Yet he built a dynasty that made Anfield the most feared fortress in world football. Paisley's Liverpool wasn't about outrunning opponents. It was about outpassing them with a relentless, suffocating rhythm. Pass and move wasn't just a chant. It was a ruthless doctrine. They kept possession patiently, drawing teams out before exploiting the space left behind. When Dalglish replaced Keegan, he brought elite vision to a squad known for its uncompromising toughness. They won back-to-back European Cups in 77 and 78, establishing an immediate aura of invincibility. Then came the anomaly. If Liverpool was a machine, Nottingham Forest was a miracle. Under the dictatorial, charismatic brilliance of Brian Clough, a team of apparent cast-offs, journeymen and local lads achieved the impossible. Clough didn't rely on complex tactics. He relied on sheer psychological warfare and an unbreakable dressing room. He convinced players like John Robertson, a brilliant but notoriously unfit winger, that they were absolute world beaters. Forest won the First Division right after being promoted, and then instantly won back-to-back European Cups in 79 and 80. They rolled into hostile European stadiums utterly unfazed, defending like their lives depended on it, and striking with brutal, minimalist efficiency. Liverpool reclaimed the throne in 81, proving the empire hadn't fallen. And just to prove how deep the English dominance ran, Aston Villa, a club in complete turmoil, having lost their manager, Ron Saunders, midway through the season, went and won it in 1982. A young, inexperienced squad went to Rotterdam, threw a backup goalkeeper named Nigel Spink into the fire within 10 minutes and still shut out the mighty Bayern Munich. Liverpool wrapped up the era with another triumph in Rome in 1984, beating Roma in their own backyard on penalties. Bruce Grobbelaar's wobbly legs on the goal line became the defining image of English swagger, a mixture of nerve, madness, and utter confidence. The English clubs of this era didn't rely on a magic square or intellectual pretensions. They relied on immense physical conditioning, unshakable self-belief, and a direct, high-tempo style that continental teams simply could not handle. They stripped the game down to its barest essentials: win your battles, keep your shape, and punish mistakes. English teams simply wore opponents down, replacing tactical nuance with raw intensity and physical dominance. The Dutch trio, 1988 to 1993. In the late 1980s, while Diego Maradona was performing miracles in the south of Italy, a different kind of storm was brewing in the north. This time, the saviour wasn't a single man. It was a trinity. At AC Milan, a club desperate to reclaim its lost glory, 3 men from the Netherlands arrived and completely reinvented how the game was played. Ruud Gullit, Frank Rijkaard, and Marco van Basten. Instead of simply joining the team, they formed a perfect, interlocking machine that the world had never seen before. If Maradona was chaos and individual genius, the Dutch trio was organised, lethal elegance. They brought the philosophy of total football into the rigid defensive world of Italian Calcio, and the result was devastating. It started in the summer of 1988. The Netherlands had always been the nearly men of Europe, beautiful losers, who dazzled in the 70s but fell short in the finals. But in West Germany, things felt different. Gullit was the captain, a physical specimen with flowing dreadlocks who could play anywhere on the pitch. He was power personified. Rijkaard was the steel, the anchor who turned defence into attack in a heartbeat. And then there was Van Basten. He was the artist. He moved with the grace of a ballerina, but finished with the ruthlessness of an assassin. That summer, they exorcised the ghosts of the past. In the final against the Soviet Union, Van Basten delivered the defining moment of the era. From an impossible angle, with the ball dropping out of the sky, he didn't control it. He simply lashed a volley that defied physics, looping over the goalkeeper and into the net. It was the greatest goal in the history of the tournament. The Netherlands won 2-0, with Gullit scoring the opener. They weren't just champions, they were icons. Back in Milan, the owner Silvio Berlusconi paired this Dutch nucleus with the tactical genius of Arrigo Sacchi. The result was arguably the greatest club side in history. The contrast was startling. Italian football was famous for Catenaccio locking the door and winning 1-0. Milan weren't satisfied with winning, they wanted to destroy you. With Rijkaard dominating the midfield, they pressed teams into submission. Gullit drove through defences like a freight train, and Van Basten was waiting at the end of every move. The 1988-89 season was their masterpiece. In the European Cup semi-final, they humiliated Real Madrid 5-0 at the San Siro. It was a changing of the guard. The Spanish giants looked old and slow next to the dynamic, orange-infused Milan. Then came the final in Barcelona against Steaua Bucharest. It was a massacre. Gullit scored 2. Van Basten scored 2. Milan won 4-0, and the rest of Europe could only watch in awe. They had turned the biggest game of the year into an exhibition match. Van Basten won the Ballon d'Or that year, his second of 3, cementing his status as the best pure striker on the planet. They did it again the very next year. This time, it was Benfica in the final. Rijkaard, often the unsung hero among the flashy forwards, scored the only goal. They defended their European crown, a feat that wouldn't be repeated for decades. During this run, the San Siro became a fortress. The Immortals, as they came to be known, seemed unbeatable. They had the tactical discipline of Italy and the creative freedom of the Netherlands. It was the perfect marriage of styles. But like all great tragedies, the end came too soon, and it was heartbreaking. The physical toll of Serie A was immense. Defenders, unable to stop Van Basten legally, resorted to hacking him down. His ankles, fragile from years of abuse, began to give way. He played through pain that would have crippled lesser men. By 1993, at the peak of his powers, the Swan of Utrecht was grounded. He was forced to retire at just 28 years old. When he walked out onto the San Siro pitch in his civilian clothes to say goodbye, grown men in the stands wept. Capello, the coach, cried on the bench. It felt like watching a painter have his hands taken away. With Van Basten gone, the trinity was broken. Gullit moved on to Sampdoria, and Rijkaard returned home to Ajax to mentor a new golden generation. But for that 5-year window, from 1988 to 1993, they were untouchable. They won 2 European Cups, multiple Serie A titles, and 4 Ballon d'Ors between them. Beyond the trophies, they brought a level of sophistication and cool to the sport that defined the 90s before it even started. They proved that football could be both a physical battle and a work of art. The Dutch trio conquered Italy, but more importantly, they conquered the world's imagination. Ferguson's United and the Premier League, 1992 to 2003. In 1992, English football was reborn. The old First Division, with its muddy pitches and crumbling terraces, was swept away. In its place rose the Premier League, a glitzy, televised revolution that promised to take the game to the moon. But while the suits in London were counting the television money, a Scotsman in Manchester was plotting an empire. Alex Ferguson had arrived at Old Trafford 6 years earlier with a singular obsessive goal: to knock Liverpool off their perch. For 26 years, Manchester United had wandered in the wilderness, watching their rivals hoard trophies. The pressure was suffocating. The club was a sleeping giant that had forgotten how to wake up. Then came the catalyst. In November 1992, Ferguson took a gamble on a mercurial Frenchman named Eric Cantona. He arrived with his collar turned up, his chest puffed out, and an arrogance that United desperately needed. Cantona treated the pitch like a stage. He dragged the team across the line, and in May 1993, the drought finally ended. United were champions. The floodgates were smashed off their hinges. With the monkey off their back, Ferguson built a machine. They won the double in 1994, playing with a swagger that terrified the rest of the league. But Ferguson wasn't satisfied. He knew that to build a dynasty, you have to be ruthless. In the summer of 1995, he did the unthinkable. He sold his established stars Paul Ince, Mark Hughes, Andrei Kanchelskis, and didn't buy replacements. The pundits laughed. "You can't win anything with kids," they said. They were wrong. Out of the academy emerged the class of '92. David Beckham, Paul Scholes, Nicky Butt, and the Neville brothers joined Ryan Giggs in the first team. These were talented players, but they were also brothers who had grown up together, drilled in the United way. They played with a telepathic understanding and a fearless energy. They clawed back a huge deficit to Newcastle United, broke Kevin Keegan's heart, and won the double again. The kids were all right, but the defining moment of the era, perhaps the defining moment of club football in the 20th century, came in 1999. It was a season that defied logic. United were fighting on three fronts: the League, the FA Cup, and the Champions League. No English team had ever won all three. In the FA Cup semi-final replay against Arsenal, down to 10 men, Ryan Giggs intercepted a loose pass, ran through the entire Arsenal defence and smashed the ball into the roof of the net. It was the kind of goal that makes you believe in destiny. They secured the league on the final day, but the Holy Grail was waiting in Barcelona. The Champions League final against Bayern Munich was a nightmare for 90 minutes. United were trailing 1-0, battered and exhausted without their captain, Roy Keane. As the clock ticked into stoppage time, the dream looked dead. The ribbons in Bayern's colours were already being tied to the trophy. Then, in 3 minutes of madness, the world turned upside down. First, Teddy Sheringham scuffed home an equaliser from a corner. The Germans were shell-shocked. Moments later, another corner. Beckham swung it in, flicked on by Sheringham, and Ole Gunnar Solskjaer stuck out a boot. And Solskjaer has won it! The commentary remains etched in history. Ferguson, stunned on the sideline, could only mutter, "Football, bloody hell! They had done the impossible." The treble was theirs. From that night on, Manchester United became a global phenomenon. They won the league by 18 points the next year, and then made it 3 in a row in 2001. David Beckham became the most famous man on the planet, transcending the sport to become a pop culture icon. His haircuts made front-page news. His free kicks were works of art. The club became a brand, touring Asia and selling shirts in corners of the world that had never seen a football match. But through all the noise, the glitz, and the celebrity, Ferguson kept his grip iron tight. By the time 2003 rolled around, the landscape was shifting again. Arsenal's invincibles were on the horizon, and a Russian billionaire was about to buy Chelsea. Beckham left for Madrid, marking the end of the romantic era of the class of '92 as a complete unit. But for those 11 years, the Premier League belonged to one club. They had turned Old Trafford into a fortress, and the English game into a global spectacle. They played with a relentless, never-say-die spirit that mirrored their manager's personality. Other teams won titles, but Ferguson's United defined the era. They were the standard, the villains, and the heroes all at once.